My name is Rob Knochenhauer. I'm the Director of Regulatory Affairs at Censys Technologies, and I'm here with Greg and Haye today on the PiXL Drone Show to talk about BVLOS operations.
Hi everyone, I'm Greg from Pilot Institute. We train drone pilots all over the country.
Hi, my name is Haye from DroneXL, where we cover all the drone news on our website.
Welcome to the latest episode of the PiXL Drone Show, our weekly podcast where we talk to industry professionals about what they do in the UAS space.
From professionals who use drone to fly inspection missions to public safety users or even drone light shows, you will learn on the PiXL Drone Show that drones are much more than just toys.
What's up, Haye?
Hey man, how are you?
Good. I'm actually cold because it is freezing in our office. So I'm going to be doing the show today with my full sweater because my feet are actually cold right now just talking.
And you're in sunny, warm Arizona, and I'm in chilly, cold New York in my polo shirt. Thank you very much.
Well, I wouldn't call it sunny. It's sunny for sure in Arizona all the time, but it's been cold. It's been freezing every night pretty much for the last week or so.
Oh boy.
People always wondering, we get snow, we get all that stuff, and they're like, in Arizona? But yeah, we're at a higher altitude, so we get all that kind of weather, and it gets chilly. And in this building, they just haven't figured out how to make this work. So one of the office is actually warm, but the studio in itself is freezing. So Ethan and the editing team are in the actual studio, so they're freezing their butts. We get space heaters for them, and then in the other side, we're actually doing pretty good. And we have, it's something funny. We have a chocolate shop that just opened literally on the other side of the wall, and we can smell the chocolate being made all day long. So if you actually go into our bathroom, it smells even stronger. It smells like chocolate is being melted in there. Yeah, it's and it's good quality chocolate, so we're pretty excited.
It's funny that you mentioned that. I used to go to college in Haarlem in the Netherlands, and there was a chocolate factory there. I don't know if it's still in operation, but back then it was. And on certain days when the wind was like coming from a certain angle, like the entire city would smell of chocolate. So it sounds great, but after a while, it's like, bleh.
I think we're going to get sick of it, but we've been talking to the owners, and they're pretty nice. They brought us chocolate yesterday, and I'm a chocolate addict, so this is not going to be good for my bank account, my weight, and anything else.
Stuck between drones and chocolate. There you go. Lucky you.
Yep.
So who do we have on the show for today?
We have Rob Knochenhauer. He's the VP of Government Affairs for Censys Flight, and is that And
I think you got that right. Yeah.
Yeah, they have a fixed-wing aircraft, that VTOL fixed-wing aircraft that they've been flying BVLOS in quite a few places. And I met him in Colorado. There was a pretty small meetup and got to talk to quite a few people. And then we got talking about BVLOS and kind of the theory behind BVLOS and how you get approval from the FAA and kind of how, the FAA is still trying to figure this out in a way. And they've been pretty successful. So I invited him on the show, and I think we're going to have a good discussion on that kind of stuff, because it's still the holy grail. I know a lot of people call it that, and it sounds cliche, but BVLOS is still something that the FAA is promising that this is going to become routine. I don't know if the FAA is promising. The industry is promising that this is going to become a routine operation. I'm not entirely sold. I think there's still a lot of things that we need to do before that happens. So we'll see what happens, but I think it's going to be a good discussion.
I agree. I mean, there's definitely a few more hurdles that we need to overcome before beyond visual line of sight drone operations will become routine. I think Rob has been involved in actually getting a lot of the waivers from the FAA as well. So it should be a very interesting discussion, kind of picking his brain and learning how to do waivers and how to get them approved quickly, and to learn more about the company that he works for.
Yep, I agree. Well, let's bring him on board and let's get talking. All right. Well, Rob, welcome to the show. Exciting to have you on board, and we're going to talk about a lot of cool regulatory stuff, which is not always something that we can say.
All right. Glad to be here. Thanks, Greg. Thanks, Haye. Nice to meet you both. This is awesome.
Okay. Well, let's talk about, before we dive into all the details, let's talk about how you get into drones. What gets you started? What gets you excited about working with the drone industry?
So how I got here was, I started off, I'll give you the condensed notes here. So I started my career as an aircraft mechanic, and then I realized that aircraft mechanics don't make a lot of money. So, particularly if you don't go to work for like a major carrier, which at the time I wasn't able to. So I ended up going to engineering school. I got an engineering degree, and had a few jobs working as an engineer. And the most recent, what really got me into unmanned systems was I worked for a company called Kinetic North America, quite a few years back, and I got involved in working on their ground robotic systems, basically bomb disposal robots, and that's where what really kind of happened to me in that situation was I met some bomb techs that were military bomb techs for the Army that had basically touted how useful those robotic systems were and how they were saving lives. And so that's what really kind of compelled me to really become an advocate for unmanned systems in general, to see how, these types of systems can be used in these, dull, dangerous, and dirty jobs to do things more safely and efficiently for folks. And really the key thing was about saving lives. And that was what was really kind of compelled me. From there, I went to work for a company called Aurora Flight Sciences, which you've probably heard of. They were doing small unmanned aircraft in addition to larger, UAS systems for, primarily for the defense industry. And it was there that I got my first exposure to working with drones. And from Aurora, I went to work with a guy named James Peveril, who was the CEO of GreenSight, and GreenSight was focused on doing golf. Sorry, I'm totally drawing a blank here. It was doing work on golf courses. Basically, it was a precision agricultural application where they were using drones to help golf course superintendents better assess the health of their turf grass. And so this was meant to be run as a daily operation, and it was a very interesting thing to do, where we were helping those golf course superintendents basically make an assessment of what their property was like on a day-to-day basis, giving a more complete overview than they would be able to do from on the ground.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's cool, and it sounds like we share the same passion that drones and unmanned devices can help save people's lives. So now you're the Director of Regulatory Affairs at Censys Technologies. Can you tell us what your job entails?
So in my role at Censys Technologies, I am the Director of Regulatory Affairs, and what I do in that capacity is I'm helping Censys in their very unique position where, as a drone manufacturer, they are actively helping their clients get waivers for doing operations with Censys drones. So the Censys drone it's a VTOL fixed wing aircraft, and that has an embedded detect and avoid sensor in the aircraft. So that sensor is the Iris Cassia 1 sensor. And so it's a forward-facing camera that Cassia has spent a lot of time and money developing the algorithms for, to identify intruding aircraft or other things into the airspace where the drone is flying. And so what happened in 2020 is that Censys put together a relationship with Iris to get that sensor integrated onto the aircraft, and took that approach to basically say, to prospective clients, if you buy this aircraft, we will guarantee that we'll help you to get a waiver. And so that's what Censys had started doing in early 2021. They had some pretty great success with that, moving the needle on getting waivers granted to a number of customers. And so what happened is by the end of 2021, they started to recognize that they had a bit of a backlog. So there was only one person that was actually ghostwriting those waivers for clients, and that is the CTO, John Lovell at Censys. And so I was contacted by Kyle Miller, who's the head of the business development team at Censys last fall. And we had a conversation, and next thing you know, here I am working for Censys, helping them ghostwrite waivers for clients, in addition to working on some of the strategy about how we're going to generate our next system to have a greater level of capability for users to have. So we're exploring things along the lines of type certification, and if not type certification, certainly something that's going to be a bit more compliant with some of the regulatory rules that are coming about in the coming years here.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds like that's a lot of work, and we've got a lot of questions coming up on
Right.
on the BVLOS thing, and because we get these questions on a regular basis, from just about anyone. How do you get to fly beyond visual line of sight? Anytime we post a comment about someone flying beyond visual line of sight, people are always asking, how can they do this? It's not allowed under the regulation. So we'll talk about all this. We all know that it is, but there is a way to do it. How old is Censys? How long have they been making drones? What's kind of the history behind the company?
So Censys is a fairly young company. It was founded in 2017 by 3 Embry-Riddle graduates, which is why Censys is headquartered in Daytona Beach in Florida. And so the premise of why the company was founded was to, at that time, 2017, it was, shortly after Part 107 was released in August of 2016. Yeah. And, what was recognized, under Part 107 is that it changed the formula about how commercial drone operations were run. So prior to when Part 107 came out, as a commercial drone operator, to operate legally, you had to operate under a Section 333 exemption. And in order to actually fly your drone under 333 exemption, you had to have at least a Part 61 or Part 91 or some other pilot rating to actually operate drones legally in this country, which was not really, it wasn't sustainable, frankly. So Part 107 certainly made that a lot easier. In addition, Part 107, had put together these waiverable components of Part 107 that you could actually apply for and get these types of approvals. Hence, you talk about the BVLOS approval, which is is basically a waiver to the rule of 107.31. And so 107.31, in addition to the other components, could be waiverable rules. I guess we're going a little bit off track here, but for Censys, what they recognized is they wanted to focus on the BVLOS operations. So Censys started off as a fixed wing drone manufacturer, and they were, had basically early on, they had some success with helping Untamed Arrow secure a waiver in 2017 for doing BVLOS operations with a Censys aircraft. But I honestly don't know the details around how that waiver was granted. I'm certain there were visual observers involved in it and something to that effect. And however, so Censys moved forward with this, building fixed wing aircraft, which are more conducive for running BVLOS operations. The reality is for the size scale that we're talking about here, a Censys aircraft has about a 7-foot wingspan, weighs just over 20 pounds. And you can see it with the naked eye out to about a mile. And so the usability of being able to operate out to a mile it's okay for doing some near to field surveying work and photogrammetry and that sort of thing. But the folks that Censys was really trying to target were those longer range operators that are doing linear infrastructure inspection and that sort of thing. And so that was the focus of Censys out of the gate. They ran along that path with the fixed wing aircraft for a few years. Quickly realized that most service operators that are using drones, that need the flexibility of having the vertical takeoff, because fixed wings are they're challenging to manage. Particularly as you're going to one site to another site and trying to figure out okay, where am I going to land the aircraft here? And so it just makes a lot more sense to have a VTOL effect, which is why at this stage, certainly over the past 5 years, you've seen a lot of companies come out with a VTOL fixed wing solution for doing just that. So Censys went down that road and continued focusing on the BVLOS use case with very limited success up until 2020. So in 2020, as you may recall, there was a big shutdown of everything in March, and Censys was actually was in a bit of a tough spot because the people that were buying airplanes were not buying airplanes at that stage, and it was at that point in time that Censys made that connection with Iris Automation and worked on embedding the Cassia sensor into the the BVLOS Centero is the name of the aircraft that we're selling as a VTOL fixed wing, and really started to take off. Went to the races with getting BVLOS waivers from the beginning of 2021. So
interesting.
Awesome. Well, you already teed up my next question, basically. I was going to ask you about the kind of drones that you guys offer for people. Can you tell us a little bit about the specs, the payloads, and also I'm curious, is this a drone that was developed in-house, or are you guys working with a manufacturer to make these drones? So yeah, whatever you can share.
Sure. All right. So the design of the aircraft was came out of the engineering team out of Daytona Beach. The aircraft is, it's produced by, a lot of resources all around the world. Unfortunately, at this stage, a couple of those happen to be in China. So, and one of the things that's on our technology roadmap is to actually look at how to actually, get our aircraft to be in a place where we can make it NDAA compliant, so that we can, target some of these more, some of the government contracts that we currently are not really able to address. Back to the specs of the aircraft, it is a VTOL fixed wing aircraft. The Centero BVLOS is the version that has the Cassia 1 sensor embedded into it. We do also make a VLOS version of the plane, which does not have the Cassia sensor integrated into it. The reality is we don't actually sell many of the VLOS planes. Most customers that are coming to us for a solution are looking for the BVLOS aircraft. So the aircraft itself, it's like I said, the all-up weight is 23 pounds. That's the maximum takeoff weight of the aircraft. It has a payload capacity of just about 4 pounds. Unfortunately, I'm not really the big specs guy here, so I'm not going to be able to rattle off all of our payloads off the top of my head. What I do know is we support a MicaSense sensor, so that's that has the cameras and the infrared sensors on it as well, and for doing, health assessment for, vegetation, that sort of thing. We also have a number of Sony cameras on the aircraft as well, integrated and using for photogrammetry purposes. And there's the Phase 1 camera, which is that's an incredible sensor. I mean, it's just your 100 megapixel camera. And one of the things that's interesting is we actually got helped one of our clients, Aerial Vantage, to get a waiver for a 100 square mile area in south central Florida, where they're using a Phase 1 to operate. That's a BVLOS approval up to 1,000 feet AGL. So it's a BVLOS coupled with an altitude waiver. So that's that I believe is the only one, from what I can tell, looking at the waivers granted page of the FAA's website, that is currently published. So that's kind of a neat story there. So and then
is this the raised? Sorry, is the raised elevation there? Is that because of the high resolution of the Phase 1 camera allows you to fly higher, so you can cover a larger area quicker?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So they're using the Phase 1 because the reality is a Phase 1 flying at 1,000 feet is going to be comparable with a 40 megapixel Sony flying at 400 feet. For the ground sample distance that you're able to get with that type of photogrammetry. So that's a great application for our system and that payload. That's a pretty big deal, that particular camera sensor. And then recently, in the past couple of months, we finished our integration of a yellow scan LiDAR sensor onto the aircraft. I don't know the specs of what that LiDAR sensor is offhand, but it is definitely, it was something that we spent a lot of time, working back and forth with yellow scan on this to get a LiDAR sensor for a fixed wing solution, which is definitely something that's not too widespread at this stage. So that's an attractive solution for folks that are using LiDAR in for whatever it is that they're using LiDAR for. It's like, I know I've had experiences using LiDAR for basically coming up with like bare earth assessments to come up with, what the actual terrain is under the trees and that sort of, under the scrub, that sort of thing, which is pretty useful. Yep. There are obviously a whole other bunch of use cases for LiDAR. My role is I'm certainly focused on regulation, so I'm not really as focused on the end use cases. So that's anyhow. So that's what those are the major sensors that we offer for the aircraft. We also have a gimbal EO IR payload that we I've used for doing that can also be used for inspection type of work. Honestly, it's I think the advantage of the Centero in that regard is that it can actually get out to places to do some kind of remote inspection work. The reality is if you have like a nearer field type of inspection operation, you're probably better off with like a multi-copter to do that type of work. So it's we recognize that our aircraft is it's a single tool in kind of the overall commercial drone space toolbox, if you will. So I'm not going to try and tell you that for doing like inspection operations that you're going to use close in type of stuff that something that is very well suited for a multi-rotor that you could use the Censys aircraft for. Whereas yes, you could, but it's you're going to be taking a hit on the data quality that you get if you do that, frankly. So.
It sounds like you guys have very specific drones that are valuable in very specific missions, and like you just said, not for every kind of drone operation. Clearly, now based on the payload, I can imagine that the price of these drones can fluctuate quite a bit, especially when you have a phase one camera or a LiDAR system involved. But if we ignore payloads, can you give us an idea about the price range for these Centero drones?
Oh boy, they're not cheap. I mean, so the Centero, the base Centero aircraft without the sensor on it, the Cassia sensor, is about 35,000, I think. These are ballpark prices. With the Cassia sensor and the subscription to the licensing software from Iris, that gets up to 60. So it's a big price difference between the BVLOS and the BVLOS version. And then the payloads that, I think the phase one is somewhere in the order of like 60 or 70 just for that sensor. The LiDAR is well over 100. I don't know the exact number on that, but these are, the folks that gravitate to use the Censys aircraft are people that are using it in these types of drone service operations where there's actually a measurable ROI here. So, and those are the people that have tended to use the Centero are folks doing a lot of linear infrastructure type of work. We've also had a number of educators that have been adopting the use of the Centero as a way to augment their UAS programs to basically offer something beyond what the basic Part 107 training curriculum would involve. Certainly helping to train some of those operators to run these BVLOS operations. In fact, one of the more interesting waivers that I worked on this year was for Fullerton College out in California. They have been granted a waiver to do an operation with the Centero in kind of the greater Los Angeles area in Class Delta airspace, where the way that they frankly the biggest issue there was managing the ground risk, because they're operating in what is a state park that has 2 miles of clear space where the aircraft can be flown, but we have to have a number of VOs in that operation just to watch the trails throughout this park to make sure that we're not overflying people. But that said, it is interesting. So that's Fullerton has that particular waiver. Train ND out of Williston State College up in North Dakota also has a waiver, and we're actually working on to help get them a waiver that will allow them to a similar performance-based waiver to operate nationwide, which I suspect they'll probably just use in North Dakota. But so that's exciting. Our service training provider is the Unmanned Safety Institute. So the Unmanned Safety Institute, actually, they're one of our training partners, but the USI has a waiver as well, and they are running, training operations for our operators. So one of the things when we sell an airplane to a client, we also include the training under USI or the training provider that they choose to assure that they are fully cognizant of how to run these BVLOS operations safely.
Yep, that's important.
Yes.
You mentioned the obstacle avoidance system. Can you tell us how important that is into getting that BVLOS waiver? Because the FAA obviously can you discuss what the FAA is looking for when they provide the BVLOS, and why we can't fly drones right now by just simply looking at an FPV view, for example, and saying that's good enough to see other vehicles and other aircraft that are flying in the area. I kind of want to rope that into the obstacle awareness because I know how important it is, but I want you to explain that part.
Okay. That's Well, there's there's a lot that you just asked there, Greg. So let me see if I can piece this together. So
I think that's the whole conversation in one question.
In one question, yeah.
So the thing is what I've increasingly come to be aware of is that the FAA is looking to basically have assurance that you have awareness of the airspace that you're operating in. And so, one could argue, okay, if you're operating an FPV aircraft and you are seeing what the drone is seeing as it's flying through the air, that you certainly have a level of situational awareness. What you do not have with an FPV drone is that you don't have the ability to look around anywhere other than the direction that your aircraft is flying in. So, there's situations like, I'm going to refer to, the tragedy that happened there's a tragedy that happened this past weekend in Dallas, and then there's the tragedy that happened in Alaska with two touring aircraft that were operating in a very remote area of Alaska, both broadcasting ADS-B, and they had a midair collision. And the way that collision happened is that literally there was a blind spot that the pilot of the aircraft that was closing on the other side was not able to see around, and hadn't paid it, and basically wasn't looking at the information that being provided over the ADS-B information to know that there was that other aircraft there. It's a kind of a similar concept in what happens with FPV, in that those blind spots are the things that are really giving you lots of gaps in what your awareness is of what's happening in the airspace around you. There's also the fact that a drone is going to operate at, say, between, I don't know, let's say 30 to 70 miles an hour or something to that effect. And, you can't necessarily know about like the, I don't know why I always think of a P210 Centurion that could be, closing at you at, 180 knots, and if the person piloting that aircraft doesn't see your drone, again, it kind of comes down to the way the rules are written is like it's the drone's responsibility to maintain well clear from any other air traffic. So, so that's kind of and we have the similar situation with the sensor that is on the aircraft that we operate. So the BVLOS Centero has a forward-facing Cassia sensor. We do not have the Cassia X, which is the 360 view. It would be we would love to be able to put that on an aircraft, but the aircraft right now, in order to get that sensor on there, we'd have to make a lot of changes to the aircraft and effectively reduce our payload capacity to next to nothing. Which is at that point, it's the truck is useless if it can't carry anything. So. So in that regard, the airspace awareness that we have with Cassia 1 augments our airspace awareness of the entire operation. So we are still in the operations that we have approved to date, we're still using visual observers to, and give us airspace awareness of what's happening in the area where we're operating. We have to have those visual observers have to be in constant communication with the remote pilot to assure that they can communicate quickly and efficiently with the pilot if they happen to see something occur in the airspace where the BVLOS operation is being conducted. So that I think I could go on about this topic for a long time. But that's it in a nutshell. But I can tell you one of the things that we're actively exploring is ways to leverage the sensors that we have, and then also explore new technology solutions to embed into our system to allow us to run those operations without visual observers is basically our ultimate goal, because we recognize that even in spite of the fact that we've been able to get performance-based approvals that allow us and some of our clients to operate nationwide with our systems, there's still a heavy labor load. And, in order to run an operation where you're running, an area, say, and this is like a 6 mile area where you're running 3 miles one way, 3 miles the other way, you still have to have a minimum crew count of 4 to run that operation, actually 3. You need an RP and then 2 BOs on either side to basically give you that airspace awareness. It's workable, but the end goal to get to a place where we have
not perfect.
Reduce that crew count. So,
yep.
Yeah. All right, so we're shifting gears here a little bit. We had some other questions about the drones, but I think since we're talking about BVLOS and waivers so much, we might as well continue down this track for a while. Can you explain to us what performance-based waivers are from the FAA and how you get them and how you guys are able to fly your BVLOS missions?
Sure. So BVLOS performance-based waiver. What that means effectively is that the FAA is giving you a little extra latitude in how you conduct your operation. So the waivers that Censys had received, up until earlier this year, and some that we're still receiving for certain locations, are geographically constrained. So that means it's for a specific area, and it could be an area as small as like a couple of square miles to many miles of infrastructure that we're getting approvals for. So in the geographically constrained case, you basically define the area and you show how you're going to maintain yourself to be safe within this area and how you operate that safely, basically assuring that you have a clear understanding of the airspace risk and the ground risk. And so what we've done is Censys is able to leverage the approvals that we had received for 20 plus customers in different areas all around the country, and to basically boil it down to the essence of showing okay, there's a very specific type of area that we can operate in. And the reality is that specific type of area that we can operate in covers a huge swaths of the country. So the way we set up our performance-based approval is we restricted it to a certain level of population density to basically show just kind of at a base level that if the population density is below a certain threshold, which is in our case it's 200 people per square mile, that the risk of in both air and ground risk are just reduced, because there's just not as many people that are going to be operating aircraft or being on the ground in those areas. We further added in a restriction on terrain. So what we speak about like how the terrain, the elevation is changing based on where the launch and recovery is, based on where visual observers are. The language we put together basically calls out that we're taking this terrain and we're limiting it to a place where that we can see not everything. So there, the terrain's not. We didn't call it a dead flat terrain because that's not very realistic. But our terrain limitations for our waiver right now is something on the order of like 800 feet elevation change per mile. So it's in certain parts of the country it doesn't work. There's lots of places in like Colorado and Arizona where that's might be tough. But we haven't really. For me personally, I'd like to get to a place where I can, characterize those types of areas as well. For what we're doing right now is kind of a generic cover catch-all. This works out pretty well. And so then the other piece is about, where you place your people and, really focusing on the view shed. And so what we've identified is kind of a view shed, up angle that we're looking at to make sure that, where people are placed on the ground, whether it's the launch location or the visual observer locations, that, there's a clear view of the airspace around where they're at. That is a pretty essential component of it. And because, if you can't see the sky, like if you're in a spot where you've got a VO, let's say, next to a building or between a line of trees, like along a right of way or something like to that effect, you might be able to see for, many miles very low along the right of way. But, if you wanted to see anything that was below 1,000 feet, basically like more than a half a mile away from you, you wouldn't necessarily be able to see that if you're obstructed with trees on either side or a building or something to that effect. So we recognize that that's a very important thing to distinguish in that performance-based approval. So that's it. So there's population density, trees, distances from airfields. We basically restrict it so that, for that performance-based approval, that we're not operating any closer than 2 miles from an airfield. Basically, that assures that we're not going to. Well, that assures the FAA by stating that we're not going to be operating, in a place where there could be a conflict with an aircraft, making an approach or departure from an airfield.
So apart from geographical constraints, are there also constraints in terms of how long your waiver is valid and the times that you can fly or the days that you can fly those missions?
We are restricted to operating in daylight hours only. So we didn't get a 29 approval with our waiver. So it is daylight hours, and then also in compliance with other Part 107 reviews for visibility. It's effectively a VFR operation. So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm sure you've submitted quite a few of these now to the FAA and working with the FAA. What are some of the things that you've had issues that basically the FAA said, no, you can't do that? Is there anything that pops out as being more difficult in order to get approval?
Getting approval without VOs is very complicated. That's the solutions that I know that are pretty much surefire for doing that is, right now it's ground-based detect and avoid systems. And certainly if you have an aircraft that's compliant with the Operations Over People rule, as the EV was recently announced to be, then that makes things a little simpler in terms of managing your ground risk as well. So that gives you a little bit more operational.
But even then, that's very limited. That EB is a category 3, which means that you have to be in a restricted area and everybody has to be on notice. So it's still not like a forever approval where you can just go wherever you want, right?
That's about, actually, it's funny. I haven't read it that closely. So I think you're a little bit more on the pulse of this than I am, frankly, on that. But yeah, that makes sense. You definitely, that has become a very complicated thing, doing operations over people. So it's there.
So I think it's interesting that the FAA, even with that sensor that you have on board the aircraft that has the ability to sense other aircraft, is still not okay with doing this without a VO. What are the limitations of that sensor? Is it that it just won't detect? I mean, would it be able potentially, let's say you have an aircraft right here and then you have your drone coming head on, would it be able to detect and avoid absolutely. At that stage?
Yes, absolutely. It is absolutely effective for that scenario. What it is not effective for is if your aircraft is flying this way and then you have something coming in at the side that the drone cannot pick up, coming in for that type of an operation. So that's, and we're working on some ways to even leverage that particular piece of tech that we have on the aircraft to get more. In fact, that's actually what I'm working on at the moment. I can't really give you the details of how I'm doing this, but we're in the process of working on a waiver request. We're using the existing DAA solution and restricted to certain areas to do operations without VO. So
interesting. And so you mentioned, the ground detection systems. Now, that's something that's going to slow down the spread of BVLOS as a routine operation across the country, because now we're talking about installing ground detection radars or ground detection systems, and I'm guessing these are going to be spaced out pretty closely, you would think, kind of like a cell phone tower. How often we have cell phone towers? What's the idea there?
Yeah, so I think it depends on your operational concept. So, and it depends on who's paying for it. So in the case of how Censys is, our vision for how we would use a ground-based detect and avoid solution is is in concert with our mobile command centers. So one of the things that's actually kind of interesting with Censys is, in addition to drones, we also sell these trailer or van or truck-based mobile command centers, which are systems that have redundant computers and a mast that we can get up to 30 feet to give us a better link quality for running longer range operations, and I've only been in the trailers so far. So the trailers, they also have climate control in them. So if it's in a place where it's cold, you've got heat, or if it's hot, you've got AC, and it's and there's typically a generator and battery backup banks, and so you have this great standalone command center. And so some of the customers that we work with, they trailer these command centers to different locations that they're doing operations out of. And so for us, it wasn't really that much of a stretch to imagine integrating in a radar system onto one of these trailers to basically use as our way to do kind of a portable detection type of system. And so one of the avenues that we're envisioning for performance-based approval is without using VOs, is to have one of these setups where we have a trailer outfitted with a radar system that is maintaining that airspace awareness while the aircraft is operating, to however many miles that it operates from the ground control station. So that is a pretty compelling avenue. But then there's another use case that I've been thinking about as well, which is where you have like DAA as a service. So I had the opportunity to be on a panel at the UAS summit, UAS AAM summit here in New England last month, and we were talking about just that. How there are certain states, if you look at North Dakota and Ohio, that are leveraging, and New York as well, that are leveraging these radar solutions to basically give a lot of airspace awareness. And so, what I could imagine, particularly from our perspective as an OEM, providing these types of solutions, that there would be a market for folks that would actually pay for having that DAA as a service. The fact is we're, at Censys, we're having conversations with prospective clients who are open to the idea of having their own radar system. And so, and now you're talking that's not cheap. You're talking about anywhere from, $250,000 and up for a radar system. And if you have folks that are actually willing to spend the money on that type of capital equipment, I think having a service model where you pay like $1,000 a month or something like that for having DAA, in certain areas around the country, becomes an attractive solution. So
I was going to mention that next, with North Dakota. I think they're doing the same thing in North Dakota at the testing site.
Yeah.
We had them on the show actually a couple of times talking about this. Nice. And so at that stage, it becomes a state level investment, or like you're saying, maybe possibly even a private level investment where they can charge for it. If you look in the concept of Operation 2.0 that the FAA put out for UTM, they actually talk about having a service supplier, a USS, that would provide weather information and possibly even DAA, detect and avoid information, like you said. So I think all these concepts to me are very interesting because they're very forward thinking, but it's an infrastructure that needs to be put in place, right? If you look at I like looking at electric cars and you think about the concept of electric cars and having the charging stations all across the country. That can't happen until somebody spends the money on developing these kind of technologies, even though there's no current users for it. It's a big bet, right? It's a big bid, in doing it. Obviously Tesla did that with the electric cars and it's blown up ever since. But, how do you think we can bridge that gap? Because I personally think this is going to be, unless the FAA becomes all of a sudden very lax with providing these BVLOS waivers, how do we bridge that gap so that BVLOS can become what people are saying it's going to become, which is a routine operation? I don't see it happening unless we have that major investment in that infrastructure. Is that right?
Oh man, that's I'm going to go off the reservation here because this is an opinion thing more than anything. Because I don't, you know, it would be great to see some effort put into putting investment in that type of an infrastructure. And you've seen it. It's happening. I mean, you cited North Dakota, and we talked about Ohio and New York. There is investment that has gone in to develop that infrastructure. What's also, tough about it is that the time to get that ROI on that investment. So
Exactly.
you look at a place like North Dakota, and North Dakota has a pretty rich history in aerospace, and so and they have representatives that are pretty well focused on aerospace solutions and very forward thinking in that regard. And it becomes, because I've been to North Dakota a number of times, and it's the culture around aerospace is just like it's more palpable than it is other parts of the country. So I live in Massachusetts, and so it's very different political environment here in Massachusetts, where I worked for the Department of Transportation excuse me, here in Massachusetts for 3 years, and helping the drone program here, and we made some great strides on moving things forward, but it's getting the funding for the underpinnings of what has happened in places like North Dakota and Ohio is very difficult to do, because the political environment is very different. There is always going to be competing pulls for those dollars, and so where you get yourself on that list of of what comes before you
priority
is the priority exactly, the priority list is harder to manage in a place like Massachusetts than it would be in a place like in North Dakota, and so and obviously you talk about, like, even at the federal level, it's like there's like this big deadlock between how things are moving between the two parties, and it's just it's very hard to get those types of things done. So I wish it'd be great if we could just pull the trigger and like, oh yeah, let's get this set up and make it happen. But it's we're kind of like in the chicken and egg phase of this of the industry in that happening. I certainly see it being something that'll roll out as time moves forward, but the timing of which is a little unclear. You look at
I think the example that Greg just mentioned about Tesla and the supercharger network is a good example, because that wasn't funded by the government, right? I mean, it took somebody with deep pockets, Elon Musk, to basically roll the dice and be like, right, we're going to build this regardless. And it sounds like maybe in the drone industry, we would need somebody similar. You mentioned that those radar systems are about $250,000 and up. I was curious, like, what kind of companies are looking to potentially set up those systems so they can use their drones? Is that like utility companies or oil and gas, or what kind of companies are those?
So the folks that we're primarily working with are utilities, and well, kind of a mix. I mean, it's definitely the companies that have the more funds available to them, which are going to be the oil and gas and utility industries, because there's this, there's a lot of infrastructure that they have to manage, and it becomes, unmanned systems become kind of a compelling solution space to move forward with, compared to like traditional aviation operations that a lot of these industries are already using. So those are definitely the ones that are moving in that direction of considering those types of assets.
Yeah. So if you're well prepared, like you guys are, and you need a waiver from the FAA, like how long does that process take to get a waiver? And are there things that you think that the FAA could improve upon to make the waiver process either quicker or easier or more accessible for more folks?
Well, I mean, first off, I think the thing that would be make it more accessible is having more people to staff the groups the team that actually evaluates the waivers. I mean, I think it's 6 people that are in AFS 820 that actually review every single waiver.
6 only?
So. It's a very small number of folks.
It's a small number.
So, and to that end, what I'll tell you is what I have found has been very successful. And I tell this, anytime everybody asks, not everybody, when anybody asks me about how to apply for a waiver, one of the things that I always, tout is the waiver safety explanation guideline. So it is posted on the FAA's website, and there is a PDF document that was updated in July of this year that has questions for every single area that you want to get a waiver for. It has questions that you should answer. And what I do, in addition to providing a con-op for how we're going to run these types of complex operations, I will have the con-op, but in addition to that, I very plainly answer every single one of those questions in the waiver safety explanation guideline, because the folks that are evaluating the waivers need to have answers to those questions. So that's if there's one thing I can I hope that people can take away, is like, that's the piece. If you are able to kind of plainly answer those questions, then you've got a better shot of actually getting an approval.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip.
Help the FAA to do their work by being a step ahead of the game in that sense. But it's interesting that you mentioned they only have 6 people approving waivers for what is like the fastest growing part of the aviation industry, the drone industry.
And that's the thing is, and so the FAA has been. I mean, let's face it. I mean, the FAA was effectively blindsided by the drone industry. Or they're either blindsided, or in some cases maybe just chose not to take it seriously. I don't know what the case is. I mean, but obviously the FAA is a big enough organization where there's it's a bureaucracy. It's just like there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen that are like have varying opinions. I don't have kind of the inside track of how those types of things get, how those decisions get made and how things get prioritized and that sort of thing. But what I can tell you from my experience in working in the drone industry is I like to look at airspace authorizations, because that's the place where I have a lot of different types of experiences. So I have applied for, I don't even know. I mean, it's like 50, 100, different airspace authorizations at different airports all over the country. When I worked at Green Sight, so Green Sight was a drone service provider, and we ran operations nationwide. And so, in controlled airspaces nationwide. And so I remember the first controlled airspace authorization that I sought was for a place in California. It's called California Golf Club. It was in SFO's airspace, basically right off of the runway that takes off to the northwest, and there were no facility maps, there was no Lance. This is all before any of this stuff. And so the way that you sought to get permission is you basically contacted the folks at ATC, and what I have found is at San Francisco, I basically wrote a very extensive safety case and was denied many times before ultimately getting on the phone with somebody over there and explaining to them what we were doing and how we were going to manage our risk, and got to the point where they were comfortable with how we were doing this. And I had conversations like that with other air traffic facilities all around the country. And some of them were just like, yeah, okay, I understand what you're doing. This is great. And others were very, just no, like couldn't even hear. Once I said drone, the answer was no. And so, obviously things have changed quite a bit, since 2016 when I was doing this, but it still is that inconsistency is. It's across the FAA as well. It's like there are some folks who are very compelled by seeing the value of drones and wanting to move the needle forward there, and others that are really kind of on the side of the traditional aviators and seeing what's happening here is kind of being, these upstarts are trying to break into our airspace. And I actually understand both sides of the coin. It's just like
Yep.
It's tough. I'm sure I don't know if Haye, if you're a pilot as well, but I know you are, Greg, and it's just like, and I'm sure there's probably some, apprehensions to.
Oh, there's fear.
Yeah, of course. Right.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And rightfully so, I think.
Yes,
rightfully so.
Absolutely.
We got to be able to learn how to share the airspace, and that's one of my missions. My personal mission is to make sure we educate as many people on the airspace and why you need to be paying attention to other people, especially when you're close to airports. So that's
Yeah. So I'm not a pilot myself, other than flying drones, but it's funny to see the drone industry being like the fastest growing. I mean, there's so many unmanned aircraft, so many flight hours made. It's also the safest part of the aviation. We still don't have any fatalities as far as I know of. It's interesting that you said that the FAA almost seemed like they were blindsided by the growth of the drone industry. Do you feel that perhaps we need like a federal unmanned aviation administration next to the FAA or as part of the FAA that totally caters to the drone industry and takes it serious?
I've never thought of that before. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I mean, certainly it kind of fits in. If you look at, pretty early on, there was a talk about unmanned traffic management, that were kind of in concert with the air traffic management. And so, I guess thinking about that as kind of the next level, it's like it could be a viable concept to have those two segregated type of entities. So I have no idea what that would look like, but it's an interesting concept.
Yeah, I mean, to me, sometimes it feels almost like the drone industry is this wild teenager growing up and then acquiring all these skills and getting taller, getting bigger, getting stronger. And the FAA is almost like the parents. It's like, okay, slow down, buddy. Like it's going too fast, too quick. But at the same time, the benefits, especially for people that are in the drone industry and take, for example, saving lives with drones, the benefits are so obvious, it seems. It's been very safe so far. You would think that the FAA might want to take us more serious.
Yeah, well, and you touched on a point about saving lives, and the FAA has done a pretty great job, I think, of standing up public safety official support for drone operations. Certainly in the wake of a disaster, the FAA has basically a 24-hour hotline that public safety officials can reach out to get those complex approvals, without much trouble at all and very quickly. And so that is a great attribute that the FAA has put forward. But of course, obviously, to do that, like particularly if you're looking for a BVLOS operation under an SGI or special government interest approval, it's they have to. What the FAA does is they throw up TFRs, which then, of course, interferes with man traffic, which becomes complicated. And so there's but I guess the reality is there is a pathway that the FAA has done a great job, I think, in working that avenue as well. But even still, there's still a lot of room for improvement there.
Yep. Yeah. I want to switch gears because we often talk about remote ID on this show, but typically from a different perspective. So I want to spin remote ID slightly differently here because we're talking about BVLOS. We're talking about unmanned traffic management. When remote ID was introduced back before we got the final ruling on how to comply with remote ID in Part 89, the FAA had talked about having more of a network type of approach with remote ID, which we know, if you've been following this for a while, didn't happen. We now have a local version of remote ID. Do you still see a benefit to remote ID as far as unmanned traffic management, the way that it is done right now? Or do you think that we have to wait until a network remote ID before we can use that for traffic separation, for DAA, and for better BVLOS?
Oh. That's
sorry with the loaded questions.
Again, kind of, this is my own opinion here. I really think that, network solutions need to be implemented to get those types of, to basically work with an unmanned traffic management system. That a network solution really makes the most sense. But as far as the applicability to true BVLOS, I would say it depends on where you are. So a lot of the folks that Censys has been working with are operating in areas that are a bit more remote, where the need for an unmanned traffic management system is frankly not there. And I think, UTM is really, it's interesting because I started working for Censys about 8 months ago, and before then I was working for the Department of Transportation in Massachusetts, and the concept of unmanned traffic management to me, working in Eastern Massachusetts, was a lot more pronounced for me because of the fact that, conducting drone operations in this more densely populated area with more complex ground and air risk, made it pretty clear to me that, having an unmanned traffic management system just makes a lot of sense in that type of environment. And the reality is, like, there's a lot of parts of the country that are like this. And it turns out there's, by percentage area wise, there's a lot more parts of the country that are unpopulated.
Not like this. Yep.
And so from the perspective of where Censys sits on this, UTM is like, okay, it's not, that being said, we're having conversations with folks that are, looking at providing those types of service, whether it's unmanned traffic management or some of the stuff that you're talking about earlier, like the weather assessing information, which that actually is valuable the further you get off of the beaten path, because having better intelligence about your weather is critical to doing these types of operations, particularly, and I'm totally sidebarring here, when you talk about longer range BVLOS operations, where if you're in a space where now I can operate up to 10 miles from my base station, I may not necessarily know that I'm compliant with the visibility requirements as I get 8 miles away from our base location. So so those are things that we're actively thinking about, kind of in concert with the BVLOS operations that we're doing currently to try and continue to move the needle there. So.
Well, if you think about it, the FAA has figured this out for many aircraft. We have centers that are in charge of busy airspace, and then everywhere else, you're not really talking to anyone. Yeah. And I don't really know why they keep thinking that we need UTM everywhere and anywhere. And I think that's what you said too. You're in Massachusetts, where you have busy airspace, dense population, and that's where Washington, D.C. is. This is where a lot of these people that make the regulation live. I don't know if they've ever been out west where I live. We don't need that kind of operation because, before you hit anyone, the statistical probability of hitting someone with a drone as we're flying around is very low, unless you're close to an airport. Then it makes sense to have UTM. You talk about your performance-based approval, where you have an approval that is based on a limit with a number of people per square mile. We should have something similar where UTM makes sense with remote ID for certain types of operation that are going to be operating in that kind of airspace. Then yes, you should have remote ID. And I think this is where the FAA, and this is a personal opinion, I think this is where the FAA missed an opportunity to make remote ID something that's going to be actually useful, as opposed to something that people are going to go against, because in most cases, I don't think we need it. And I know the FAA was not entirely involved, not just the FAA, let's put it this way. There were a lot more people than just the FAA involved in the, in that discussion of remote ID. But yeah, it's interesting to hear you say those things. I think it falls in line. It's sometimes a bad opinion to say, yeah, remote ID is something that we need because people just don't like remote ID in general. But I think in some situation, it is a good solution for UTM purposes. And that's where I think we're missing that opportunity at the moment.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I certainly, my simplistic understanding of why, the network solution of remote ID got removed from the final rule was had to do with the security concerns. And,
yes,
security concerns, potential for spoofing. I mean, and the reasons make sense, but it's, ultimately, and it's actually, as we're kind of moving on, this is a kind of a different topic here, is talking about that cyber security element of the total operation space. And it's something that, we are becoming increasingly aware of, because, what we're looking at now also is we're looking at different C2 solutions for operating our aircraft. So there are a number of companies that do operations over cellular networks, and so that kind of opens a whole another level of security that's
yes.
that's frankly beyond my level of understanding, frankly. But it's kind of an interesting thing to consider. So.
I'm glad you brought up security. Earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that Censys is aiming to become a blue SUAS provider, perhaps at some point in the future. The blue SUAS standards, do you feel that those are being accepted now by commercial customers, and that companies like, let's say, utility companies or oil and gas companies use that benchmark as like, these are the kind of drones that we want. We want drones that meet the blue SUAS requirements, even though we're not a government entity, but we need those kind of drones to fly over our refinery, for instance, or what have you?
I can't say universally whether, industry is embracing those standards. I certainly hope they aren't, for a number of reasons. And in particular, that the Blue UAS initiative was put together at a DIU and was frankly moved forward by a very small group of individuals, and who frankly did not have the bandwidth to manage the full number of applicants that were interested in becoming vetted on the Blue UAS list. And kudos to the companies that have made it onto the Blue UAS list. There's definitely value in having that certification, but the reality is the Blue UAS hasn't been rolled out in a way that has been equitable, frankly, to a number of companies that could be compliant and be on that list. So we put in our application when we were not selected a year ago when the solicitation went out in 2021, and of course, being a Florida-based company, where there's been some legislation that was put forward to basically restrict the use only to Blue UAS systems in the state of Florida by public entities has been problematic. And I think that the directive to do that is problematic because, there's a legacy. It's like there's public safety operators have been using drones for a long time, and they're increasing the numbers of drones that they use every year over year. There's more departments that are getting involved in the use of drones. And the reality is that, DJI is, there's a lot of things I could say about DJI, but they make an incredible product. Their products they're very well sorted and they work really well. And for a lot of public safety applications, it's the answer to the mail. And to try and to put legislation forward that says, oh, by the way, the 100,000, or however much you've got invested in this hardware, you have to basically throw it in the dumpster, is just like it's a non-starter, because what happens is that these agencies, that as they start to use it, they really start to experience the real value of using drones. And now you're saying, okay, you had fun with your tool for a little while, now you have to take it away. It's just like so that's a tough thing to
Yeah, and we're not just talking about drones that you can't use and therefore you lose the monetary value of those drones. You also use the potential of those drones in terms of the ability of saving people's lives or helping in disaster recovery and all those kind of things. And do you feel that in Florida they had a clear picture of that when they changed those laws?
I'm going to liken it back to the example that was used earlier about UTM and remote ID. That a lot of people in Florida, like in the case of the UTM, it's like you have people that live in kind of a densely populated area like DC. The folks in Florida have that were making those decisions, and this is unfortunately probably true in a lot of cases, is that people that make the decisions on these types of things are not necessarily talking to the folks that are actually using the systems that they're making the decisions on. I think that's probably the biggest issue there.
Yep, I agree with that. Well, I think this was a great topic to kind of finish the discussion. We've been talking for a while, and this was very insightful. I really appreciate you taking the time to come talk about all these things. I do have one more question before we go, and this is something we ask of all of our guests: is what is your favorite drone that you like to fly? Just today, you were to go outside and pick up a drone to go fly for fun. What would you use?
I have a Mavic 2 Pro. that's the drone that I will typically go out and fly just for fun. It's one of those things I would like to. I've considered getting into flying more interesting stuff. Because this is the thing is I had actually never flown a drone up until I started working for GreenSight. And I was terrible at it at first, so when I worked for GreenSight, I was in charge of like doing a lot of our checkout flights on all of our aircraft, and a lot of our aircraft were frankly not ready for prime time. And I've, by crashing a lot of drones, I learned, I learned how to fly them. So, but it's still, I haven't done like any, true RC flying. It's something I've always wanted to get into as well. But yeah, for the most part right now, it's like if I were to go out, it would be with the Mavic 2 Pro that I have.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good platform. Yep, that's a great platform.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, Rob. Well, appreciate your time, and we will definitely be. If people are looking for more information, where can they find more information about Censys?
You can go to the Censys Technologies website, which I don't know what it is offhand, but it's
we'll put it down in the description.
We'll put links in there. I think it's
that sounds about right. Yeah, so you probably know that. But, yeah. So Censys Technologies is you can find information about Censys and the products we sell and payloads and other solutions. So.
Well, we look forward to hearing more in the news about more approval and flying BVLOS becoming easier for everyone. And we definitely appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to join you guys today. This is awesome. And certainly things just kind of off the cuff that I would like to see happen is like, we at Censys are in a place where we're having some success in helping people get these approvals right now. And we'd like to be able to hopefully lay a framework for how, other folks can actually, capitalize on the successes we're having in the moment. So great.
That's awesome.
We'll definitely put a link to the FAA questionnaire that you mentioned earlier in the description below, so people can get right to the source.
Yeah, no, it is a solid thing to address when you're applying for a waiver.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Rob.